The wedding ring caught the light as she raised her hand to brush back a strand of honey-blonde hair. James Blackwood froze mid-stride in the crowded Manhattan restaurant, his breath catching in his throat. 3 months. It had been only 3 months since they'd signed the divorce papers, ending their 7-year marriage, with signatures that felt like final nails in a coffin. Yet there sat Rebecca, his ex-wife, at a corner table, laughing, radiant, and wearing what was unmistakably a wedding band on her left hand. For a moment, James considered walking out. The reservation at Lumiere had been his assistant's idea. The best French restaurant in the city, Mr. Blackwood, perfect for impressing the Tokyo investors. Now, he cursed the coincidence. Rebecca had always loved French cuisine. Of course she would be here. Mr. Blackwood? The maitre d' appeared at his elbow. Your guests have already arrived. They're waiting at your table. James straightened his tie, a reflexive gesture that gave him a moment to compose himself. At 42, he had built Blackwood Ventures into one of the most successful investment firms in New York. He had navigated market crashes and outmaneuvered ruthless competitors. He could certainly handle seeing his ex-wife unexpectedly. Thank you, he said, forcing his gaze away from Rebecca. Lead the way. As he followed the maitre d' through the restaurant, James felt the weight of Rebecca's presence behind him. The investors from Tokyo were seated at a table that gave him a clear view of her. Perfect. 2 hours of watching her laugh and smile while he tried to focus on securing a deal worth millions. Mr. Blackwood, what a pleasure to finally meet in person, said Takahashi, the lead investor, rising to shake his hand. James smiled, slipping into the role of confident CEO with practiced ease. The pleasure is all mine. I trust your flight was comfortable. The conversation flowed naturally into business talk. James ordered wine and appetizers, made appropriate small talk, and began his well-rehearsed pitch about expanding Blackwood Ventures into Asian markets. But beneath his polished exterior, his mind kept returning to Rebecca and that ring. They had met 10 years ago at a charity gala. She had been a talented event planner, confident and quick-witted, unimpressed by his wealth or status. He had fallen for her instantly. Their courtship had been whirlwind, their early marriage blissful. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. His company had grown, demanding more of his time. Rebecca had wanted children. James had asked for just another year to stabilize the business. That year had stretched into 3, then 5. Mr. Blackwood? Takahashi's voice pulled him back to the present. Your thoughts on the regulatory challenges? James recovered smoothly, launching into an analysis of international finance regulations. But his gaze drifted again to Rebecca's table. She wasn't alone. A man with dark hair sat across from her, his back to James. Who was he? Who was this person who had put a ring on Rebecca's finger mere months after their divorce? The man stood up, excusing himself, presumably heading to the restroom. James finally caught a glimpse of his face and felt the floor drop from beneath him. Daniel Scott, his former chief operating officer. The man James had personally mentored for 5 years before Daniel had abruptly resigned 8 months ago. The timing suddenly struck him like a physical blow. 8 months ago. Daniel had left the company 2 months before Rebecca had asked for a divorce. Excuse me for one moment, James said to the investors, pushing back his chair. I need to speak with someone briefly. Before he could reconsider, James was crossing the restaurant floor, his heart pounding in his ears. Rebecca saw him coming, her smile fading, replaced by a look of resigned calm that only fueled his anger. James, she said as he reached her table, I'm surprised to see you here. Clearly, he replied, his voice low and controlled despite the storm inside him. 3 months, Rebecca. It's been 3 months since we signed the papers. His gaze dropped pointedly to her left hand. Tell me who he is now, though I think I already know. Rebecca's fingers closed around the stem of her wine glass. This isn't the place, James. Daniel Scott, he said, watching her reaction carefully. My former COO. The man I trusted with company secrets. The man who resigned without explanation. Were you seeing him while we were still married? You don't get to do this, Rebecca said, her voice steady but her cheeks flushing. You don't get to show up and demand explanations about my life anymore. He was my employee, James hissed, my right-hand man. And I was your wife, Rebecca countered, leaning forward. Or at least, I was supposed to be. But I was really just another asset in your portfolio, wasn't I? Something you acquired but never really valued. The words stung more than James wanted to admit. So this is revenge? You marry my former employee to get back at me? Rebecca laughed, but there was no humor in it. My God, James, is that really what you think? That everything is about you? She shook her head. This has nothing to do with revenge. And for your information, I'm not married to Daniel. James glanced at her ring in confusion. Then what? James. Daniel's voice came from behind him. I think you should return to your table. Your investors are watching. James turned to face his former COO, noting the lack of a wedding band on Daniel's hand. What's going on here? He demanded. If you're not married to each other, then who? Mr. Blackwood. The maitre d' appeared again, looking uncomfortable. Your guests are asking for you. James glanced back at his table, where the Japanese investors were indeed watching with curious expressions. He had lost control of the situation, something that rarely happened in his carefully managed life. This isn't over, he told Rebecca quietly. Actually, it is, she replied. That's what divorce means, James. He returned to his table, apologizing smoothly to the investors and redirecting the conversation to business. Somehow he made it through the rest of the meal, signing preliminary agreements and shaking hands as the evening concluded. All the while, his mind raced with questions. If Rebecca wasn't married to Daniel, who had given her that ring? And why was she dining with his former COO? The coincidences seemed too deliberate. As the investors departed in their waiting car, James lingered outside the restaurant. He spotted Rebecca and Daniel leaving together. Walking close but not touching, they climbed into a taxi without noticing him watching from the shadows. James pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Michael, it's James Blackwood. I need you to do some digging for me. He paused, watching the taxi disappear into the New York traffic. I need everything you can find on Daniel Scott's activities since he left my company, and I need to know who Rebecca is seeing now. Someone's put a ring on her finger, and I want to know who it is. As he ended the call and walked toward his waiting car, James couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this situation than a simple case of his ex-wife moving on. Something didn't add up, and if there was one thing James Blackwood was good at, it was finding the missing pieces in complex puzzles. What he didn't realize was that the puzzle of Rebecca's new ring would lead him down a path he never expected, one that would force him to confront not just his failed marriage, but the very foundations of the empire he had built. The sleek glass headquarters of Blackwood Ventures towered over Midtown Manhattan, a monument to James's relentless ambition. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, staring at his phone. Michael had sent the preliminary findings, but the information made little sense. No marriage license filed for Rebecca in the last 3 months, the text read. Scott has been consulting for Meridian Global since leaving Blackwood. No significant personal relationship detected between Scott and Rebecca based on social media analysis. James tossed the phone onto his desk and ran a hand through his dark hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. The ring had to mean something. Rebecca wasn't the type for meaningless symbols. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Come in, he called, turning from the window. His assistant, Vanessa, entered with a folder. The quarterly reports you asked for, Mr. Blackwood, and Ms. Chen from legal says the Tokyo contracts are ready for final review. Thank you, James said, taking the folder. Has Michael arrived yet? He's waiting in the small conference room. James nodded. Tell him I'll be there in 5 minutes. Alone again, James opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small photograph he kept hidden beneath files. It showed him and Rebecca on their honeymoon in Tuscany, her head resting on his shoulder as they sat on a stone wall overlooking vineyards bathed in golden light. Her smile had been so genuine then, her eyes bright with hope for their future. When had that changed? When had her smiles become polite instead of joyful? When had I love you become have a good day at work? He replaced the photo and closed the drawer. The past was the past. What mattered now was understanding what game Rebecca and Daniel were playing. In the conference room, Michael Parker waited, his laptop open before him. As Blackwood's head of security, Michael had a background in private investigation that occasionally proved useful beyond his official duties. Tell me what you found, James said, closing the door behind him. Michael adjusted his glasses. Like I texted, there's no marriage license. Rebecca hasn't changed her social media status. She's still using her maiden name, Carson, professionally. She's been busy with her event planning business, Seems to be doing well, actually. Several high-profile corporate events in the last few months. And Daniel. That's where things get interesting. Michael turned his laptop around. He's been consulting for Meridian Global since leaving Blackwood. Specifically, he's been working with their acquisition team. James felt a chill. Meridian Global was Blackwood's largest competitor. Is he sharing company information? Nothing I can prove yet, Michael said cautiously. But there's a pattern to Meridian's recent acquisitions. They've targeted 3 companies that were on your potential acquisition list last year. The list Daniel helped create, James said quietly, the implications sinking in. What about his connection to Rebecca? They've been seen together at several business functions. Nothing romantic that witnesses report. More like colleagues. Michael hesitated. There's something else. Rebecca's company, Carson Events, has been contracted to organize Meridian's annual investor gala next month. James leaned back in his chair, processing this information. So Daniel leaves Blackwood, joins our competitor as a consultant, and then helps Rebecca secure a contract with them. That can't be coincidence. I don't think it is, Michael agreed. But I'm not sure what it means yet. What about the ring? James asked. If she's not married, why is she wearing a wedding band? Michael shrugged. Could be an inheritance. Could be for show. Some women wear them to avoid unwanted attention. But James knew Rebecca better than that. No, it's deliberate. She knew I might see her at Lumiere. It's been one of her favorite restaurants for years. She wanted me to notice. The intercom buzzed. Vanessa's voice came through. Mr. Blackwood, Ms. Chen is here with the contracts. Send her in, James replied. The discussion of Rebecca would have to wait. The Tokyo deal was worth millions and required his full attention, yet throughout the meeting with his legal team, James found his mind drifting back to that glint of gold on Rebecca's finger. After the lawyers left, James found himself pulling up Rebecca's business website on his computer. Carson Events had grown significantly since their divorce. The site showcased elegant corporate galas, charity fundraisers, and exclusive product launches. The client list was impressive. One event caught his eye, a charity auction for the Metropolitan Museum. The photo showed Rebecca in a blue evening gown. Smiling alongside an older woman James recognized immediately, Eleanor Winters, the influential widow of banking magnate Richard Winters. Eleanor's family controlled Winters Financial Group, one of the oldest and most respected financial institutions in the country. The pieces began to shift in James's mind, forming a new pattern. Eleanor Winters also sat on the board of Meridian Global. James picked up his phone and dialed Michael again. I need you to look into connections between Rebecca and Eleanor Winters, he said without preamble. And I want to know if there have been any unusual stock movements with Winters Financial Group. That evening, James found himself parked outside Rebecca's brownstone in Brooklyn. He hadn't planned to come here, had told himself it was beneath him to spy on his ex-wife, yet here he was, watching as lights moved through the rooms of the home they once shared. His phone rang. Michael. You were right, Michael said without greeting. Winters Financial has been quietly increasing their stake in Meridian Global over the past 6 months. And there's more. Meridian has scheduled a major announcement for next week. Rumors say they're planning a hostile takeover bid. For which company? James asked, though he already suspected the answer. Nothing confirmed, Michael replied, but market analysts are pointing to either Blackwood Ventures or Astor Capital as likely targets. James ended the call just as Rebecca's front door opened. She stepped out onto the stoop, wrapped in a light jacket against the early autumn chill. To his surprise, she walked directly toward his car. He rolled down the window as she approached. How did you know I was here? He asked. Your car costs more than most people's homes, she replied. It's not exactly inconspicuous. She crossed her arms. Why are you stalking me, James? I'm not stalking you. I just want answers. Rebecca sighed. Come inside. The neighbors don't need to see us arguing on the street. He followed her into the brownstone, noticing the changes she'd made since he'd moved out. New artwork on the walls, different furniture arrangements. It no longer felt like a place he had ever lived. You're working with Meridian Global now, he said once they were in the living room. You and Daniel both. Rebecca sat down on the sofa. Yes, they're clients of mine. Clients who happen to be planning a hostile takeover of my company. Her expression revealed nothing. I wouldn't know about that, Don't lie to me, Rebecca. You're wearing a wedding ring 3 months after our divorce, having dinner with my former COO, and working for my biggest competitor who's now targeting my company. Do you really expect me to believe these are all coincidences? Rebecca held up her left hand, the gold band gleaming. You want to know about the ring? Fine. It was my grandmother's. I started wearing it after the divorce to remind myself of what real commitment looks like. My grandparents were married for 62 years. And Daniel, James pressed. He reached out after he left Blackwood, said he was consulting for Meridian and recommended me for their events. It was a good contract, so I took it. She met his gaze steadily. Not everything is a conspiracy against you, James. But something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation, told him she wasn't sharing everything. Eleanor Winters, he said. How do you know her? Rebecca's fingers tightened slightly on the arm of the sofa. She's a client. We met at a fundraiser last year. Before or after you asked for the divorce? Before, Rebecca admitted. What does it matter? James leaned forward. It matters because Eleanor Winters sits on Meridian's board. It matters because Winters Financial has been increasing their stake in Meridian. It matters because everything seems to connect back to our divorce in a way that can't be coincidental. For a moment, Rebecca's composed facade cracked. Something like regret flashed across her face before she masked it again. You always were good at seeing patterns, she said quietly, but you never could see what was right in front of you. Before James could respond, the front door opened and footsteps sounded in the hallway. Rebecca looked up, her expression softening. Perfect timing, she called out. We have a visitor. James turned, expecting to see Daniel. Instead, a young woman with auburn hair stepped into the living room, stopping short when she saw him. Oh, she said. I didn't realize you had company. Rebecca stood. It's all right. James was just leaving. She turned to him. James, this is Charlotte Davis. My business partner and roommate. Charlotte nodded politely, but her eyes held a wariness that suggested she knew exactly who he was. Charlotte, James acknowledged, noting the absence of a ring on her finger. So, not the mysterious spouse. As he drove home later, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something obvious. Rebecca's words echoed in his mind. You never could see what was right in front of you. What hadn't he seen? What was he still not seeing? The annual Blackwood Ventures Leadership Retreat had always been held at the Adirondack Lodge, a secluded luxury resort nestled among pine forests and crystal-clear lakes. In previous years, Rebecca had handled all the arrangements, transforming the corporate gathering into something that felt personal and special. This year, James had tasked Vanessa with the planning, and while everything was technically perfect, the entire event felt hollow. The market projections for Q4 look strong, said Thomas Reed, Blackwood's chief financial officer, as the executive team gathered in the lodge's conference room. But we need to address the rumors about Meridian Global's expansion plans. James nodded, his mind only partially on the presentation. What's the latest from our intelligence? Their announcement is scheduled for tomorrow morning, replied Grace Wong, the head of strategic development, who had been promoted after Daniel's departure. Industry analysts are speculating it's either an acquisition announcement or a major new product launch, or a hostile takeover bid, James added grimly. The team exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone in the room understood what was at stake. If Meridian managed to gain control of Blackwood Ventures, most of them would likely lose their positions. We've run the numbers, Thomas continued. If it is a takeover attempt, they'd need significant backing. Their current liquidity wouldn't support an offer high enough to tempt our shareholders. Unless they have a silent partner, James said. Winters Financial has been increasing their Meridian holdings. Together, they could make a credible attempt. The meeting continued with discussions of defensive strategies and contingency plans, but James found his attention repeatedly drawn to his phone. No new messages from Michael, who was continuing to investigate the connections between Rebecca, Daniel, and Eleanor Winters. As the executives broke for lunch, James stepped outside onto the lodge's expansive deck, overlooking the lake. The autumn colors were at their peak, maples and oaks creating a blaze of red and gold against the deep green of the pines. It was breathtaking, the kind of view that Rebecca would have appreciated. During their marriage, she had often reminded him to pause and notice such moments of beauty. His phone vibrated in his pocket. Michael, I've found something. Michael said without preamble. Rebecca met with Eleanor Winters 6 times in the months before she filed for divorce, and Charlotte Davis, her business partner. She previously worked for Winters Financial's private client division. James gripped the deck railing. So there is a connection. More than that, Michael continued. I managed to access some of Daniel's emails from before he left Blackwood. He was in communication with Charlotte Davis as early as a year ago. They were discussing something called Project Phoenix. What's Project Phoenix? I don't know yet. But there's a document that was shared between them, and the file name included both Meridian and Blackwood. I'm still trying to recover the actual file. James ended the call and stared out at the lake, his mind racing. The pieces were aligning into a disturbing pattern. Rebecca, Daniel, Charlotte, Eleanor Winters, all connected, all potentially involved in a plot against his company, against him. Beautiful view, isn't it? The voice behind him sent a shock through his system. James turned to find Rebecca standing there, elegant in a tailored pantsuit, her honey blonde hair swept back in a professional updo. What are you doing here? He asked, unable to hide his surprise. Rebecca smiled slightly. Professional capacity. Carson Events was hired to manage the retreat for Meridian Global. They're having their leadership gathering at the South Lodge this weekend. That's impossible, James said. Their announcement is tomorrow in New York. Only Eleanor and the board are heading back for that, Rebecca explained. The rest of the team is staying through Sunday. She paused, studying his face. You didn't know we'd be here. It wasn't a question, but James answered anyway. No, I didn't. Interesting coincidence, is it? James stepped closer. Because I'm beginning to think there's no such thing as coincidence when it comes to you lately, Rebecca. Before she could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the entrance to the deck. Daniel Scott, looking as confident as ever in casual business attire. Rebecca, Eleanor's looking for... He stopped short upon seeing James. Blackwood. Scott, James replied coolly. Quite the reunion we're having. Daniel glanced between them. I should go. No, stay, James said. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. Rebecca shook her head. This isn't the place, James. Then where is? Because I've been trying to understand what's happening for weeks now. He looked directly at Daniel. Project Phoenix, what is it? The flash of recognition in Daniel's eyes confirmed that James had hit a nerve. Rebecca's expression remained carefully neutral, but her fingers twisted the gold band on her left hand, a nervous gesture James recognized from their marriage. I have a meeting to get back to, Daniel said finally. Rebecca, Eleanor still needs to speak with you about tomorrow's arrangements. With a nod to James that was barely civil, Daniel retreated back into the lodge. Rebecca lingered, a conflict visible in her eyes. Whatever you think is happening, James, you're wrong, she said quietly. Then tell me the truth. She hesitated, then shook her head. I can't. Not yet. As she walked away, James felt a surge of frustration. He was missing something crucial, something that would make all the pieces fit together. Back in his suite that evening, James spread out everything Michael had sent him across the desk. Financial reports, meeting schedules, social media connections, a web of information that hinted at collaboration between Rebecca, Daniel, Charlotte, and Eleanor Winters. But to what end? A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He opened it to find Charlotte Davis standing in the hallway looking nervous. We need to talk, she said. James stepped aside to let her in, surprised by her appearance. I didn't realize you were here too. I wasn't planning to approach you, Charlotte said, remaining near the door. But things are moving too quickly and you need to know what's really happening. I'm listening. Charlotte took a deep breath. Project Phoenix isn't what you think. It's not about destroying Blackwood Ventures, it's about saving it. James stared at her. Saving it from what? From you. Charlotte met his gaze directly, or more specifically, from what you don't know about your own company. For a moment, James was speechless. Then anger rose in him. If this is some kind of game, it's not a game. Charlotte pulled a flash drive from her pocket and placed it on the desk. Everything is on there. Financial irregularities dating back 3 years, hidden accounts, altered reports. That's impossible, James insisted. I review all financial statements personally. The statements you see have been doctored, Charlotte replied. Thomas Reed has been embezzling funds and manipulating records with help from 2 board members. Daniel discovered it 10 months ago while working on acquisition projections. James shook his head in disbelief. If that were true, Daniel would have come to me directly. He tried, Charlotte said. But one of the board members involved convinced you that Daniel was becoming unstable, remember? Suggested he was overworked and paranoid. The memory surfaced clearly. William Hargrove, one of Blackwood's longest-serving board members, expressing concerns about Daniel's mental state after Daniel had requested a private meeting with James to discuss financial discrepancies. James had dismissed Daniel's concerns without even hearing them, trusting Hargrove's judgment. Why wouldn't Daniel try again? Why resign? Because he realized how deep it went, Charlotte explained. He needed to investigate from outside the company, where he wouldn't be watched. That's when he approached Eleanor Winters, who had her own suspicions about unusual patterns in Blackwood's reported earnings. James sank into a chair, his mind reeling. And Rebecca? How does she fit into all this? Charlotte's expression softened. She knew something was wrong long before any of us. You were working constantly, stressed beyond reason, snapping at her over nothing. When she tried to talk to you about the company, you shut her out completely. The truth of this statement stung. James had indeed kept Rebecca at arm's length from his business concerns, believing he was protecting her from unnecessary worry. Daniel confided in her after he left Blackwood, Charlotte continued. She introduced him to Eleanor, whom she knew through her event planning work. Together with Eleanor and me, I was working in financial forensics at Winters Financial. We formed Project Phoenix. And the ring? James asked, his voice barely audible. A signal, Charlotte admitted. Rebecca needed a way to approach you that would get your attention, make you curious enough to start asking questions. She knew seeing her with a wedding ring would provoke your pride, if nothing else. James stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkness. So tomorrow's announcement is a bluff, Charlotte finished for him. Meridian isn't trying to take over Blackwood. The announcement is designed to panic Reed and his accomplices into making a mistake, revealing the hidden accounts. Why all the secrecy? Why not just tell me? Charlotte hesitated. Because we couldn't be certain you weren't involved. The accusation hit James like a physical blow. You thought I was part of it? No one knew for sure, Charlotte said gently. Rebecca defended you, insisted you would never knowingly participate in fraud, but she also admitted that you had become so focused on growth and competition that you might have chosen not to see warning signs. Before James could respond, his phone rang. Michael's name flashed on the screen. I need to take this, he told Charlotte. Michael's voice was urgent. James, I've recovered the Project Phoenix document. It's not what we thought. It's evidence of systematic financial fraud within Blackwood, and Thomas Reed is at the center of it. I know, James said, looking at Charlotte. I just found out. There's more, Michael continued. Reed is in the building right now, accessing the company servers remotely. He's deleting files, covering his tracks. James ended the call and turned to Charlotte. Reed is making his move. Where's Rebecca? With Eleanor, preparing for tomorrow. Get them, James instructed. Bring them to my suite, and find Daniel. If what you're saying is true, we need to act now. As Charlotte hurried from the room, James stared at the flash drive on his desk. If its contents were genuine, everything he thought he knew about his company and his failed marriage was about to be turned upside down. And as the full impact of Charlotte's revelations sank in, James was struck by a devastating realization. In his relentless pursuit of business success, he had not only failed to see the corruption within his company, but he had also failed to see what mattered most. Rebecca hadn't left him for another man. She had left because he had stopped seeing her at all. The suite had transformed into an impromptu war room. James stood at the center, surrounded by the unlikely alliance that had formed to save his company. Rebecca, Daniel, Charlotte, Eleanor Winters, and Michael. The elegant septuagenarian Eleanor, dressed impeccably despite the late hour, projected an aura of calm authority that seemed to steady everyone in the room. Thomas is in the executive lounge with his laptop, Michael reported, returning from his reconnaissance. He's alone for now, but he's made 3 calls in the last 20 minutes. I'd guess he's coordinating with Hargrove and Peterson. James nodded grimly. William Hargrove and Richard Peterson, 2 board members he had trusted implicitly for years. The flash drive Charlotte had provided contained damning evidence. They had helped Thomas siphon nearly $40 million from Blackwood Ventures through a complex web of false investments and shell companies. He'll transfer the remaining funds tonight, Daniel predicted. With Meridian's announcement scheduled for tomorrow, he knows this is his last chance to cover his tracks before a potential audit. What's our play? James asked, looking at the assembled group. It felt surreal to be strategizing with his ex-wife and former COO against his current CFO. Eleanor Winters spoke up, her voice crisp and decisive. We need those transfers documented as evidence. If Reed completes them, we have him red-handed. Michael has already alerted the SEC's Financial Crimes Division, and they're standing by. But we can't let him actually transfer the money, James objected. That's $40 million of company funds. We've set up a honeypot, Charlotte explained. When Reed attempts to access the offshore accounts, he'll actually be transferring the funds into a secured holding account monitored by federal regulators. James glanced at Rebecca, who had remained quiet throughout much of the discussion. She met his gaze steadily, and in her eyes he saw something he had missed for too long: strength, intelligence, and a deep sense of justice. She hadn't been plotting against him. She had been fighting for what was right when he had been too blind to see the corruption within his own company. There's still one problem, Daniel said, interrupting James's thoughts. Reed needs authentication from either James or one of the board members to complete transfers of this size. Since Hargrove and Peterson are in New York, he'll need to use James's credentials. My credentials? James frowned. He doesn't have access to those. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Rebecca and Daniel exchanged glances. What aren't you telling me? James demanded. Daniel sighed. 3 months ago, Reed installed key-logging software on your office computer. He has your passwords, James. The implications hit him like a thunderbolt. If Reed had his authentication credentials, anything Reed did with company funds could be traced back to James. He wouldn't just lose his company, he could face criminal charges. We need to stop him now, James said, moving toward the door. Rebecca caught his arm. Wait, if you confront him directly, he'll deny everything. We need him to actually attempt the transfer. She's right, Eleanor agreed. The SEC needs evidence of intent. James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So we just wait while he tries to steal millions and frame me for it? Not quite, Charlotte said, opening her laptop. I've set up a program that will alert us the moment he begins the transfer process. Then we move. The tension in the room was palpable as they waited. James found himself standing near Rebecca, close enough to catch the familiar scent of her perfume, jasmine and vanilla. It transported him back to happier times, evenings spent talking about their dreams for the future, weekends exploring small towns along the Hudson, quiet mornings with coffee and the Sunday paper. I'm sorry, he said quietly, for her ears alone. For everything. Rebecca looked up at him, surprised by the suddenness of his apology. James, no, let me say this, he insisted. I got so caught up in building the company that I forgot why I wanted success in the first place. It was supposed to be for us, for our future. But somewhere along the way I made the company more important than our marriage. She was silent for a moment, twisting the gold band on her finger. Her grandmother's ring, not a new husband's. I didn't leave because you worked too much, James. I left because you stopped sharing your life with me. You built walls I couldn't climb. When did you know? About Reed and the others? I suspected something was wrong about a year ago, she admitted. You were stressed, distracted, constantly worried about the company's performance despite record profits on paper. When I tried to talk to you about it, you accused me of not understanding business. The memory made James wince. He had indeed dismissed her concerns, treating her as if her event planning business hadn't given her insight into corporate finances. After that, I started paying attention, Rebecca continued. I noticed Thomas acting strangely at company events, having hushed conversations with Hargrove and Peterson. When Daniel came to me after he left Blackwood, his suspicions matched mine. Before James could respond, Charlotte's laptop emitted a sharp alert. He's in, she announced. Reed just logged into the transfer system using James's credentials. Let's go, Michael said, moving to the door. James, Michael, and Daniel headed for the executive lounge, while Rebecca, Charlotte, and Eleanor remained in the suite, monitoring the transfer activity remotely. As they approached the lounge, James could see Thomas through the glass doors, intent on his laptop screen, unaware of the approaching confrontation. Let him finish the keystroke sequence, Daniel murmured as they paused outside the door. We need the transfer to initiate for the evidence to be complete. Through the glass, James watched his CFO, a man he had trusted with his company's financial future, commit financial fraud in real time. Thomas's face was illuminated by the blue glow of the laptop screen, his expression a mixture of concentration and what looked unsettlingly like satisfaction. Michael's phone vibrated. He checked the screen and nodded to James. "Charlotte confirms the transfer has been initiated. The SEC has the documentation they need." James pushed open the door. Thomas looked up, startled, then quickly attempted to close his laptop. "Too late, Thomas," James said quietly. "We know everything." For a moment, Thomas maintained his composure. "James, I'm just wrapping up some quarterly projections." "What's going on?" "Project Phoenix," Daniel said, stepping forward. "That's what's going on." The color drained from Thomas's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." $40 million, James continued, approaching the table. "Siphoned through false investments and shell companies over the past 3 years, with help from Hargrove and Peterson." Thomas's eyes darted between them, calculating. "Whatever you think you know, you can't prove anything." "Actually, we can," Michael interjected. "The SEC has been monitoring your activities tonight. They have complete documentation of your attempted transfers, including your use of Mr. Blackwood's stolen credentials." As if on cue, Thomas's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then back at James, panic finally breaking through his facade. "It's over, Thomas," James said, feeling a strange calm despite the magnitude of the moment. "The only question now is how much you're willing to tell us about Hargrove and Peterson's involvement." 2 hours later, James stood on the deck outside his suite, watching the first hints of dawn lighten the eastern sky. Behind him, federal agents were still interviewing Thomas, who had ultimately chosen to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing. Hargrove and Peterson had been arrested at their homes in New York. The door opened, and Rebecca stepped out to join him. She handed him a cup of coffee, steam rising in the cool morning air. "Eleanor says the Meridian announcement has been cancelled," she told him. "No need for the bluff now that Reed is in custody." James nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. "I still can't believe I didn't see it. All those financial reports I reviewed. I should have noticed the discrepancies. They were very careful," Rebecca said. "And you trusted them." "I trusted the wrong people and doubted the right ones." He turned to face her directly. "Including you." Rebecca leaned against the railing, her profile outlined against the lightening sky. "We both made mistakes, James. I should have been more direct about my concerns instead of withdrawing when you dismissed them." "Why did you wear your grandmother's ring?" he asked, the question that had started everything still nagging at him. "You must have known I'd notice eventually." A small smile played at her lips. "Honestly, it was Charlotte's idea. She said we needed to hack your attention algorithm. Nothing else was getting through to you." James laughed, despite himself. "Well, it worked. Though I assumed the worst possible scenario." "That I had remarried after 3 months?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Your ego is still intact, I see." For the first time in months, perhaps years, James felt a genuine connection with her, a moment of the easy banter they had once shared. "What happens now?" he asked, both of them knowing he wasn't just talking about the company. Rebecca looked out at the lake, now visible in the growing light. "Blackwood Ventures will need restructuring. The board will have to be partially replaced. You'll need a new CFO. I was thinking of offering the position to Charlotte, actually. She clearly has the financial forensics skills we need." "She'd be excellent," Rebecca agreed. "And Daniel?" James considered this. "I owe him an apology, at minimum. Whether he'd want to come back to Blackwood is another question." "And us?" Rebecca asked quietly, finally addressing the unspoken question between them. James took a deep breath. "I don't know if we can go back. Maybe too much has happened." "I'm not suggesting going back," Rebecca clarified. "The past is the past. But maybe moving forward. Not immediately," she added quickly. "We both need time. I need to know that the changes in you aren't just a reaction to crisis. And I need to prove that to myself as well," James acknowledged. "I've been thinking about what you said, about me building walls. You were right. I compartmentalized everything. Work, marriage, personal growth. I thought I was being efficient, but I was just disconnecting from what mattered." Rebecca touched his hand briefly. "For what it's worth, I never stopped caring, James. I just couldn't reach you anymore." As the sun finally broke over the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, James felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. Not the determined optimism he projected for investors or the calculated confidence he showed competitors, but genuine hope for a future he hadn't even allowed himself to imagine. 6 months later, James stood in the entrance of a beautifully decorated ballroom at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Carson Events had transformed the space into an elegant wonderland for Blackwood Ventures' charity gala. The company had weathered the financial scandal and emerged stronger, more transparent, and with a renewed commitment to ethical business practices. Charlotte Davis had indeed become Blackwood's new CFO, bringing her forensic financial expertise to bear in creating new systems of accountability. Daniel had declined to return to Blackwood, instead starting his own consulting firm specializing in corporate ethics and transparency, with Blackwood as his first client. James spotted Rebecca across the room, professionally directing her staff as they managed the event. She no longer wore her grandmother's ring, he noticed. Neither of them was ready to make promises yet, but they had been meeting regularly for coffee, then dinners, gradually rebuilding trust and communication. "Beautiful event," Eleanor Winters commented, appearing beside him. At 75, she remained a formidable presence in New York financial circles and had become something of a mentor to James during the company's restructuring. "Rebecca does exceptional work," James agreed. "Not just the event," Eleanor said with a knowing smile. "The transformation of the company, of you." James smiled. "I had good teachers, including you." "The best lessons are often the most painful," Eleanor observed. "But tell me, what will you do with your second chance, both professionally and personally?" James watched as Rebecca looked up, caught his eye across the room, and smiled warmly at him. "I'm going to see what's right in front of me," he said, "and this time, I won't look away." As he crossed the room toward Rebecca, James reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. A glimpse of a wedding ring had led to the unraveling of fraud, the saving of his company, and perhaps, just perhaps, the chance to rebuild what truly mattered, not the glass tower that bore his name, but the connections that gave that success meaning. Rebecca met him halfway across the ballroom floor, her professional composure softening into something more personal as he approached. "Everything looks perfect," he told her. "You've outdone yourself." "That's what you pay me for," she replied with a hint of the playfulness they had been rediscovering. "Actually," James said, "I was hoping to talk to you about something else entirely. When this is over, would you consider dinner? Not to discuss business or the past, but to talk about possibilities." Rebecca studied his face for a moment, then smiled. "Possibilities?" she repeated. "I'd like that." In that moment, with the gala swirling around them and the future unwritten, James Blackwood finally understood what had been missing from his carefully constructed life: the courage to be vulnerable, to admit mistakes, to prioritize relationships over achievements. It wasn't weakness, as he had once feared. It was the foundation of genuine strength and the beginning of a new chapter he was finally ready to write.